Okay, everyone, this is a continuation of the radicalization of the French Revolution. And it begins with the Legislative Assembly. So we've moved from the three estates to the National Assembly to now the Legislative Assembly. And a decision is made in the Legislative Assembly prior to setting up the National Convention, which will be the next legislative body that comes in. That decision is going to have far-reaching implications because they basically sign an oath saying that nobody who served on the Legislative Assembly nor the National Assembly can serve at the National Convention. And one of the biggest problems with it, there are really two problems. Number one, now you're talking about nobody with any experience being able to be a part of this. Number two, that also means no continuity of ideas. So the ideas expressed by the National Convention are not going to be the same ones as the ideas expressed in the National Assembly or the Legislative Assembly. And the effect of that is we move into a more radical phase because these liberal nobles, the bourgeoisie, who are advocating for constitutional monarchy, are going to gradually be replaced by the more radical elements of the mountain, of these Jacobin clubs. And so we have this turn towards radical town. And we see now, instead of the bourgeoisie leading this movement, now it's going to be driven by a group of people in part known as the sans-culottes. Sans-culottes is means without pants in French. And so we have our censored imagery there. It's not actually without pants. What it really means is without the silk-kneed breeches of the aristocracy. And so these are the true third estaters. These are your working class within urban setting of Paris. And they're going to be much more radical in nature, and we're going to see how that has an effect on everything that follows. Because now we have at the National Convention the establishment of the Republic of Virtue, truly based on the Enlightenment ideas, truly based on rationality and logic, not based on what has come before, not based on religion. And so it's at this point that the monarchy is abolished. It's at this point that a new calendar is established. You can take a look there. It's much more logical, right? Goes the same or similar amount of days as ever before. The meanings of those months are not based on things like Julius Caesar. They're not based on things like Augustus Caesar. They're based on what logically happens in the natural world. Oh, Thermidor, it's hot during July and August. Makes a lot of sense. In addition, we see the development. Why are we using base 12 number system to keep track of time of day? So you see the development of this clock over here on the side. It's based on a base 10 number system. This is getting really weird because now it's not just changing the names of things. You're talking about changing the idea of what constitutes a second of time. This is mind-blowing stuff. This is not easily accessible by the mind. In addition, if you look at this map down here, remember, they're not religious. They're logically based. They're reason. And so they do away with the idea of Catholicism. Actually, at the National Convention, this is where we see the ideas of the civil constitution of the clergy be brought to their nth degree, because all of the land owned by the clergy is now owned by the people of France. And there are no more priests. You need to reapply to be a priest. You are asking all of the monks, they're now released from their positions. And you see, based on this map, this is from 2014, I believe, the percentage of Europeans who do not believe in any God, spirit, life force, etc. Look at the difference between France and everywhere else. This has an impact moving forward, a nation that had been driven by Catholic leanings. We see this radicalization come to a head by the execution of Louis XVI. We see the painting here. You can see the head is being held for everyone to see at the gallows. We see the guillotine being used. Just some, I guess, some interesting notes about guillotine. Guillotine named after the actual man himself. I want to say Joseph Guillotine. He's actually horrified by this. This was meant to be a more humane way because at this point in time, if you had an executioner with an axe chopping your head, they could miss. In some cases, an enemy might slip the executioner a few extra bucks to, accidentally miss or not get the whole thing on the first chop. So this was meant to be a much more humane way. But as his name eventually is attached to it, he is absolutely horrified by this. And in fact, his family later will go on to ask the French government to change the name of the device itself. We then see in October of 1793 this anonymous work. This is showing the execution of Marie Antoinette. You can see her head on a pike here, shown for everybody to see. Her last words, interestingly enough, or maybe not that interesting, were, "Oh, excuse me, pardon me," to her executioner for accidentally stepping on his feet. It's kind of fun. The Reign of Terror is then going to, it doesn't even really last a year, but the Reign of Terror is going to be driven by this dude over here. His name is Maximilien Robespierre. He kind of just barely gets into the Estates Generale, and then is able to work his way through. He's eventually able to create in March 1793 the Committee on Public Safety, and this is really the driving force behind the Reign of Terror. The idea is that by purging France of the dissidents, you'll make a true republic of the French, which sounds kind of circular in logic if you're talking about basing things on logic and reason. Perhaps the killing of as many as 16,000 people guillotined in Paris during this time and the provinces around it is not the best way to go. He is helped along by André Marat, the propagandist, and then eventually Jacques-Louis David, who is the artistic propagandist of this time period. Eventually, finally, we see the end of Maximilian in 9 Thermidor, year 2. Again, the years reset because they're based on the French Revolution, not anything that happened before. And then we see eventually the establishment of a new constitution. We're on like number 4 or 5 at this point, and the establishment of a group known as the Directory, 5 people who are going to head France into the newest direction. Maximilien Robespierre, I guess I should get into this. The death of Robespierre is an interesting one. Eventually he goes too far, and this is very similar to Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare in the United States in the 1950s, senator from Wisconsin. He starts just being very, very vague. Oh, I have this new list of people who need to be guillotined. And this actually drives his enemies, who are already kind of being like, this is a load of barnacles, and being a little twitchy about how Robespierre is just kind of calling people out. Like, maybe the hate has gone too far. We got swept up in the moment. Let's, pump the brakes a little bit. This is actually the reason for a former colleague, Georges Danton, for his execution during this time period. At any rate, Robespierre and his men are cornered at the Hotel de Ville, which keeps coming up here in Paris. It's kind of like the Paris City Hall. And for himself, it's really kind of, it's frightening and almost tragic in a way. He tries to commit suicide, but has never held a pistol before, and only succeeds in blowing off his lower mandible. So his jaw is literally hanging by this larger piece of mandible that's there. And when he's found, it's assumed that he is not going to survive the night. So they actually put him on a table. He's in tremendous pain. Eventually, finally, like hours later, a doctor comes in and ties a bandage around his jaw to at least keep it up. But when it's time for his execution the next day, they put the gallows back to their former place. They had been moved multiple times because of the stench and the stickiness of the street in the town center where this has happened. They wheel it back in. There's a large crowd. His bandage is undone, and he lets out a great squeal of pain as once again his jaw hangs down once more before the guillotine finally does its job and takes care of business. This will lead us into the next part of the next phase. So we have kind of the liberal phase, driven by the bourgeoisie. Then we have the radical phase, noted by the Reign of Terror and driven by the Jacobins and the sans-culottes. And then we'll get into the Directory and then finally Napoleon. So really kind of 4 different phases of the French Revolution. There's actually an argument to be made that with the death of Robespierre, the French Revolution is over. It's more about, okay, let's assess where we are at this point in time. But it's really kind of, again, at this point that we start to see France take note of what has happened so far, start to look at which of these policies that were implemented need to be kept and which ones should be gotten rid of. You want to consider from this time, how do we move from the Estates Generale and the National Assembly into the National Convention and the Directory phases, these from liberal to more radical phases of the French Revolution? How do we get there, considering the groups that are running the show? How that move from Versailles to Paris for the legislature is going to have an impact. Those are the things that you want to make sure that you keep in mind from here. Thanks very much. We'll continue with the next phases in the next part of this series and next lecture. If you need anything, let me know. Have a great day.